broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcasts is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician. This show is a rebroadcast of the Green Crush podcast with Alan Park. Heard on 420radio.ca and seen on cbgtv.com.
It's Green Crush. Hey, well, how's it going for you this week? It's been a difficult week. People are still suffering under the bombshell news that a very powerful, talented, big-time, influential Hollywood producer has gone and let us all know that apparently that's a bit of a scummy business a lot of the time. Wow, who knew? I'm dealing with this. You don't think Harvey Weinstein's involved with this show? It is, because that's all I've been hearing about all week, and I'm a little bit behind in my research of all things cannabis, which is probably the first week I've had that going on in my life since November 2013, when I decided to use cannabis because it grows out of the ground, and I thought, let's take a shot at this thing. And now I still get to be here. And all I have to do to pay for that is to defend to the world and the majority of detractors, that I'm telling the truth. And I am telling the truth. So that's what's important about what Harvey Weinstein is saying to me. Because Harvey Weinstein is merely one problem in Hollywood. And there are other guys like him that are also a problem. And a lot of other people that are not necessarily male that are also problems. The whole fucking world, right? Oh, sorry, we got kids listening? Hey, we're after lunch anyway. Kids, you wouldn't be here without the word fuck, okay? Don't take it so personally. Green Crush. What is Green Crush? Crush is, green is the cannabis. Crush is the cancer that got in my way of my life. And I crush that. And I'm going to help you do the same thing. If you download all these episodes, and I'm so sorry, it takes 10.5 hours to listen to 10.5 hours of stuff. So some people got upset and they said, oh, I got to listen to all those episodes? What am I supposed to do? How do I get out of this? You get out of it by listening to the episodes. Because I got a lot of information in here that I used to get out of it. So, kick an hour aside as opposed to 20 hours a day for 4 years. And you should be okay with this. It's pretty good information, Maybe it doesn't fit everybody, but it fit me, and I'm still here, and I'm a biological human being. So I guess it might work for another biological human being, regardless of their illness and regardless of who they vote for. Are we off the topic far enough? Listen, we got a great show today. We have a fascinating show today. I get to indulge my legal mind, or what I have as a legal mind. When I was a little kid, my mom used to tell me I'd make a good lawyer, and then I didn't realize for many years that was actually an insult. But we have with us today a man who is going to be a lawyer. He's articling right now for a big-time law firm in Toronto, which is called, he's a student from Toronto, and he works at a law firm, and he is an articler. And we're going to hear a little bit about that, because I want to hear about the 5-7 things that were too oppressive for me to not become a lawyer a long time ago. And we'll see how he got there. His name is Harrison Jordan, and he's going to tell us all kinds of things. Once we get to know who he is, we're going to find out what he knows and what he says from a legal perspective on what's going on with cannabis laws, primarily in Canada, but all over the world. But first, hey, we have some pretty good news. We have British politicians telling us what to do all the time, and we had one last week, and we got a great response. If you didn't hear episode 13, please check it out. There's your Paul Flynn episode, and Paul is, no disrespect to our other guests on the show, but Paul has been sort of an audio anchor since the beginning of this particular broadcast, and he was on last week as a guest, so check that out, episode 13. He's the first guest on a two-guest show. And he counsels people to do the sensible thing when laws are not sensible. And here's what he says.
To break the law.
That's what he says, to break the law. And, that's what you need to do when it's so screwed up and so crazy that it's actually going to prevent you from accessing some kind of method of restoring your life, just because somebody else is all wound up about that being the wrong thing, the wrong use, the wrong substance. Usually they don't know what they're talking about, or they also use it themselves and keep it a secret for themselves because they don't want anybody else to know. But we are in Canada. And we have been hearing about cannabis constantly since our new fantastic Prime Minister took over a couple of years ago. And so that's Canada for you. That's our little anthem in the background. You don't have to take a knee for this one, I don't think. Some people might. But that's the Canadian anthem from quite some time ago. And while we ponder how Canada is going to create this massive paradigm of uncomfortable rules that ruin people's lives and ring up the legal bills, maybe boost some pay packets for the local magistrates and officers, because we're not really legalizing pot. If you think legalizing is a good thing, look at a contract. Look at anything that came out of a lawyer's office and tell me it's not hyper complicated. And now they want to do the same thing to the series of rules and laws, and I don't believe we've got Cheech and Chong with legalize it on it. I guess all that means is don't put me in jail for using it. But then that would be decriminalization, not legalization. There's a language called legalese. It's one of the most complicated languages. It's probably harder than learning Russian, Chinese, and English altogether at the same time to learn legalese. But that's what our guest is doing today, learning legalese. Harrison Jordan, he's going to help us pick it apart and figure out what is going on. And I hope he's able to do that. For your satisfaction, the same way he's able to do that for my satisfaction, to understand what are the legal implications of what Canada thinks it's doing. But in the meantime, before we get to this, let me tell you about these hearings we had a while ago, the HESA hearings, the HESA hearings, or whatever they call it. Back in September, I've been getting to this here and there. I'm going to play a little soundbite from the kind of mindset of a person who doesn't know what they're talking about vis-a-vis cannabis. They literally say that in the hearings. We don't know what we're doing, but we'd like to lay down a bunch of laws and rules based on our lack of knowledge. So that's what those hearings were all about. And some of the people and what they were saying and asking. Okay, so I'm going to cut now to a mayor in Quebec, and his name is Villeneuve, the last name. I'll get his first name when I see the clip. And he talks about how he does not want to hear about the healthful properties of cannabis. He does not want to hear any of that. It counters his opinion of the several scant facts that he's already based his shaky platform upon. And so he doesn't want additional facts and evidence and truth in what he's already decided what cannabis is all about. So here he is, voicing the last portion of his question, which is quite long, and I won't put it all in there for you, but you'll hear it, the last part of it, and it is being translated by a woman into from French to English. So for our listeners outside of the country, we have these two languages here, official languages. And so listen to his question. He's primarily asking about the safety of children, and he only wants to hear the bad news. He does not want to hear any of the good news. He just wants this panel. This way they can justify their corrupt rolling out of a completely horribly designed system. Okay, I guarantee that this thing is going to They're going to try to sell it like it's some kind of slick condo, but it's really going to be some up north country shack where you take a shit in the middle of the night into a hole in the floor. And then they're going to start wondering about how come the basement of that thing's not strong enough, and how come when they added 2 or 3 stories on top of that outhouse, it collapsed. Why not just build it properly in the first place? But we don't have people in charge that authorize those kinds of things. And so here's this guy's question. He asked the question, and then Jody Emery, who is the wife of Mark Emery, who is known as the Prince of Pot. And I've played this on the show before, but it's like a hit song, man. You got to hear it more than once. And she completely disabuses this gentleman here, this mayor of Quebec, from his completely incorrect perception of the matters at hand. And, of course, what happens when we tell someone the heavy facts and lay it all in there and let them know exactly what's going on and it counters their original position? They shut up. They still think they're right, but they shut up. So here's Jody kicking the ass out of this close-minded... let's leave the adjectives aside and you decide what you think he is when you listen to his second half of his question and all of her answer and his lack of response to it. Here we go.
There are several people who've said this. In Colorado, for example, there was a case, and also in Washington. Do you think that overnight marijuana legalization will mean that most drivers on the road will have marijuana in their bloodstream? Will most people start growing marijuana in their apartments? Will most people start using marijuana?
So a lot of people use marijuana, and now they're going to pass some laws that will bring it to a place where it didn't used to be, but now it is, and they're changing some things about it here in Canada. They've changed some things in the States. They're thinking about it in England. Everybody's thinking about changing some ideas about cannabis. And this gentleman has to jump up and ask questions such as, on this committee here, this mayor in Quebec, he says, what are we thinking about all of this? What are we thinking about the fact that children use this stuff? And do we think people are going to start smoking tons of this right away? Do we think people are going to start driving cars all the time being high? Why would that question even come into your mind? This is a sane mind, a man that doesn't use cannabis, coming up with these kinds of questions. Yeah, that's really a good commercial for the sensibility of not using it, right? Okay, so here we go with this continuation and Jody's answer. Here we go.
Because it's legal all of a sudden? Personally, I'm not a scientist, but I don't think so.
So you're not a scientist, and that's what's led you to believe that once it becomes legal, it's not really true that most people are going to use it all the time and impair all of their functions. Oh, good. Glad we had that question cleared up.
There's alcohol, there's cigarettes, there's all sorts of other legal products.
Yeah, there's alcohol and cigarettes and other legal products. Yeah, there's also soccer balls and hockey sticks and bubble gum and woolen toques for the winter.
That also can harm people, and people are aware of this, and they don't necessarily use them. So I don't think that the world's going to end as when marijuana is legalized.
Good. So you don't think the world's going to end when marijuana is legalized? I'm so glad we spent millions of dollars to convene dozens of people to sit around and make these kinds of important, brand new, fresh proclamations.
There'll be an before and there'll be an after, and the sky's not going to fall.
Yeah, there will be some skies falling on some people because some people will be getting in trouble under the new legal system.
So we need infrastructure. So that's what we're trying to establish. And we're going to consult as many people as possible. And your government does consult people. We haven't seen this over the past 10 years before it came into power. So what we want to look at is the security of our young people.
Okay, you just want to look at the security of young people. What about the children, right? That's all you want. You know all those other crazy, ridiculous, nonsensical, waste of time, straw man questions you barfed out were just that. Distracting, unnecessary, unhelpful, hysterical, and you really got to stop that shit. But at least those hearings are over. They took tons of information in, and of course the laws don't really reflect it. I think a lot of these hearings, these kinds of things, are nothing more than trying to discern the public mindset and then seeing how they can align their policy with that. I know a lot of people think the government goes, hey, what do you guys want to do? And everybody says, we want to do this. And the government says, okay, there it is. That's not how it goes. They want to know what you think. They want to know what you believe your rights to be. And that helps them tack around it. It's basically like a sports coach going up to the other team and saying, hey, can you guys share me your offensive plan so we can do a better job of defending against it? Okay, thanks a lot. So that's not going to happen. But now this guy has asked about kids and their brains and children. So this is his point, not this other shit that he was saying. And here is Jody Emery's answer and his response. Here we go.
And that's what I want to add, Mr. Chair. I have no questions.
Oh, let me just say that too. You have no questions? You have no questions. You just want to hear about the danger factor regarding young minds. But no questions. Oh, you really want to get to the bottom of things. Okay, here we go.
With teenage use, the Journal of Adolescent Health 2017 reported that teens do not experience an increase in psychotic symptoms with cannabis alone. It happens when they use tobacco or alcohol along with cannabis is when they can aggravate the symptoms. And it's a very small percentage of people already predisposed who might be aggravated. The British...
So what Jody's saying is it's not that most people are going to consume cannabis constantly and in irresponsible positions once this becomes quote-unquote legalized. It's not that at all. It's that it's quite okay for the brain. Here we go.
The Association of Psychopharmacology in 2016 said there's no IQ loss.
So you don't have an IQ loss, and the only time you ever see problems with the consumption, you're also drinking alcohol and you're also smoking cigarettes. But we don't do specific targeted studies on those. Enough that makes sense because you're not allowed to smoke in your car. But if you have a joint in the car, that's even 10 times worse. There's so much uneven ground here. So we're going to bring Harrison. We're going to bring Harrison in a couple seconds here, and he is going to try to make a bit of this clearer. We're just going to finish up with some more Jody here while she explains the rest of this. I'm going to go back a couple of seconds worth, and we'll just pick her up again. Here we go.
To look at is the security of our young people.
Yeah, the security of our young people. Here we go.
Mr.
Right
Chair,
through.
no questions.
No questions. Because you know everything.
With teenage use, the Journal of Adolescent Health 2017 reported that teens do not experience an increase in psychotic symptoms with cannabis alone. It happens when they use tobacco or alcohol along with cannabis is when they can aggravate the symptoms. And it's a very small percentage of people already predisposed who might be aggravated. The British Association of Psychopharmacology in 2016 said there's no IQ loss in teenagers, that even long-term chronic users of marijuana do not suffer any decrease in IQ. And we can see over history the increase in use of marijuana, but schizophrenia rates do not go up, IQ rates do not go down. And as I said, American Psychological Association in 2015 said that even chronic users, teenage users, don't have any further health problems later on in life. As for growing in the home...
So she just jumps into growing in the home, but when she finishes that up, the fella just sits there and doesn't really say anything at all. Now, are you asking questions? No, you don't want to ask questions, but when you did ask one question and she gave a very detailed answer, it completely went against your preconception of what you wanted the answer to be, so you don't respond to her. And I'm sick and tired of people like this calling the shots. So we have to do something about it. And one of the things I'm doing about it is trying to spread the information rather based in truth rather than propaganda for how it's no good and dangerous and poisonous and all these terrible things that aren't true. They're not true. So Harrison Jordan is in with us today, and good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on down.
Thank you very much, Alan.
Harrison's already written a couple of article pieces. I haven't seen them yet. Stuff in Leafly.
Yes.
And where else? Somewhere else.
Leafly and Lift.
Lift, right, which is the that's the big organization that we will be soon at in Ottawa. The Lift conference at the end of the month. Do join us. That's today, isn't it? Or it's this week, I think.
This week.
It is this weekend. So if you're going to Ottawa, is it this weekend? I don't know. We'll get to you later on. My producer just disappeared. It's either this weekend or next weekend, the Lift conference. Anyway, Jordan is very knowledgeable. We met at the function.
Yes.
The Green Market recently, which is a great, cool, fun place. And just before we get to the interview, Ken Proud, with an E on the end, by the way, is the winner of our first pair of tickets to this particular event, Lift, at the end of the month or next week. I'll get it back to you. And he's with Green Veterans Canada. And we got a lot of listeners there, and it's no wonder. And I hope we can get some of them to come on the show soon at some point. Green Veterans. These are folks, of course, who use cannabis after their government let them down, going through a tough time off to war based on a lie. Anyway, that's another issue. And we have 9 more days to share and to retweet and repost on Green Crush Pod about this Lift conference, and we will be doing that. But now let's get to Harrison Jordan. I'm so glad that we have an in-studio guest.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for finding us and writing us. And if we just get you to lean in a little bit on there so we can hear you better. Okay, and I'll make sure your mic's up. Okay, so before we get to the good stuff, tell me a little bit about who you are prior to becoming involved in the legal game.
Well, I've always had a fascination with the law, and I think that was going back to grade 11 in high school. I just had this law teacher that really turned me on to the law.
What's his name?
His name is Martin Sable.
Oh, okay.
And he apparently had quit law practice to teach law to high school students, and something evidently worked, and I caught on to it. And it's kind of funny. We learn about some of the same stuff in law school that I learned from him. So it's been a long time of being focused on the law, even before I went to law school. I've always had an interest in it.
Great. He planted that seed, huh?
Oh, yeah.
I had a great grade 11 law teacher as well. That's why
I
asked you for his name in case. But different guy. Okay, so then you gradually tailored your studies to get along that path, and now you are articling at a law firm in Toronto. So give us a quick rundown on what articling is, because not everybody knows. I don't fully know, and what's going to happen to your personal career later, and then let's get into the meat.
Great. So articling is sort of similar to the medical residency that medical students have to go through at the end of their term. So before you're a doctor, and in this case before you're a lawyer, you have to do something that's like an internship. You're like the right-hand man or woman to a lawyer, and there's a lot. You can have a lot of different tasks on your plate. You can be doing stuff you don't like, that we all don't like doing, but
that the lawyer doesn't want to do.
The lawyer doesn't want to do. But I've been very blessed and fortunate to be at a law firm where I can really participate with my fullest, and it's fun. It's really enjoyable to work in this field. It's not. This is a substance that brings comfort to people. And
what, the law?
No, this is a substance, not the law.
Okay.
Oh, I'm not talking about this law.
Yeah.
I might disagree with that. So it's very. I'm very happy to be in this field, to see how people are helped by cannabis, and to see how sometimes we can resolve things without having to go through the criminal justice system.
Okay, and let me just geek out for a second,
Sure.
if I am even geeking out. So let's say I'm the lawyer and you're doing my articling.
Sure.
And I've got a case coming up, and there was a woman in a car, and she was smoking a joint in the back seat of the car, but she wasn't driving, and now there have been charges pressed. And I remember that there was a case like this or something in 2003 where the ladies, it happened to be a man in that case, sitting in the backseat smoking a joint, got pulled over, and they got off. And I remember that case, kind of thing. So can you go look that up for me so I can use those informations to help me win this case? Is that part of articling, or am I just completely out of it?
Oh, well, certainly finding the cases that would be helpful to your argument. You really have to develop an argument that's based on case law.
Right.
And I actually know the decision you're talking about, or I believe I know the one you're talking about. That was, I believe, a possession charge that arose after an officer smelled burnt marijuana.
Well, that's how fun this is, Harrison.
And it's burnt marijuana, so does that indicate he's possessing it currently? And that's the great thing about law.
Well, the greatest thing about it is that you can come up with a really messed up scenario, like I just created in my mind. You're not really referring to a case that's real specifically. I just made that up because I'm the lawyer, which I also made up being the lawyer. But I just wanted to sort of get an idea on articling. So basically, you're learning so many things, and then you become a lawyer at that point. And how far away are we from that?
I'm about, I think it's about 7 months away.
7 months?
Yeah.
Wow, good for you. All right, so here's a guy that knows what he's talking about on the topic of cannabis, and he's in the legal game and will be a lawyer, and we'll have you back when you're a lawyer as well, okay? But maybe before that as well. But let's get to some things. Okay, so Harrison Jordan has written, I read this actually when it came out before I even heard of you, 5 points that are going to be a bit of a problem for Canadians, and probably already are for a lot of Americans, because the weird and cool and sometimes not cool thing about law is I know Quebec is different and Louisiana, and they have the French background, but basically legal systems are, like if you're talking to a lawyer in Florida or you're talking to a lawyer in Alaska or London, England, you're going to have a ton of things in common, right? You're going to have a lot of touchstones, even though the law is different in each jurisdiction. So if you're not listening in Canada, pay attention anyway, because these 5 things, okay, so are going to get changed here, and they're all coming from the same series of laws, like 2 nanograms of, so we'll get into that as well. But with cannabis's upcoming plan to legalize the use of cannabis to indulge your privacy in your home, that's where you have to do it. You have to do it in your home. And here are some of the big deals coming along here. Before we get to it, I just want to say that this is a segment. This whole interview is going to fall under our segment of You Can't Spell Illegal Without Legal. That's the name of this segment, and it has blossomed into an entire interview. And that's what this is. You Can't Spell Illegal Without Illegal. Brought to you by Nugs of Law. Nugs of Law, dank buds of fact designed specifically to drive you insane. Insanity, a result of the ways of the world being run by psychopaths. Psychopaths, elect one in your local district today, or chances are you already did. So that's where we're at right now. That's how I see the line of connection. And you've told us why you're into law, so tell me about this. You've got the first one being driving over the limits. Of course, that's going to be a problem, and you get into the specifics there. So, but it's not the same thing. Cannabis and alcohol. And I want to know from where comes the directive? From where comes the overarching reason and means to say, oh, this substance is just like this substance? I mean, we're not talking about a very similar item at all, not molecularly, not in how it affects you, and not in how it supposedly impairs you. So how can you just take a series of laws that are built around something else, and then it's supposed to be okay? How does that work?
It's really interesting because the rationale for these regulations, driving over the 2 nanograms per milliliter of blood and getting a summary charge for that. That's really something that it has sprung up not because of impairment per se, but because consuming some could lead to impairment. But they're not saying that the 2 nanogram per milliliter mark is because you might be impaired on it. It's the government has said they're taking a precautious approach. So it's very interesting that
pre-crime.
It's very interesting that they're not taking. They're saying, on one hand, if you have 5 nanograms per milliliter, which is when you actually can go to jail.
In Canada,
yes,
but in some other places that's the upper limit.
Well, so some other places have 5 nanograms per milliliter as the threshold, and that's what I would argue is more sane.
Because how much is a nanogram? Like, what are we talking about? The word nano means so freaking tiny you can't see it. Gram is already a small thing no matter what. How big is a nanogram? What does it mean?
Well, let's just say that there have been studies to show how much cannabis is in an individual after stopping using cannabis. And from what the studies say, if you ingest oral marijuana, so that's you eat it, sprays, whatever, and then you stop. If you were a heavy user, it might appear in your bloodstream at or above 2 nanograms 7 days later. That's if you eat it or ingest
At
it. 7
or
days.
above
7 days
2
later.
but how big is it? Like, do this. How big is a nanogram? What, you see this?
Oh,
thing?
I'm not sure. It's got to be really tiny because it's in blood too, so it's got to be a little.
So if you're going to, again, I understand that stuff, but if you're going to say, okay, we've already got in any jurisdiction in the world, pretty much, we have laws on how we distribute and control and profit from the sales, etc. Blah 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 of alcohol, liquor, booze, beer, whatever. That's a thing. How can you then take that template and drop it on top of cannabis when they're so remarkably different as a substance? And because if you're going to do that, let me finish this point. If you're going to do that, it's 0.8 alcohol, right? It's 0.8 blood is the driving.
That's right.
0.8 what versus 0.2 nanograms? Why wouldn't it be 0.8 nanograms? You know what I mean? Like every word's convenient to screw us over with some liberty being slashed or whatever it is. We go with the alcohol, right, system. And every time there's not a similarity, well, we're just going to go with the alcohol anyway. And we're going to make it even lower. And okay, I got another question as well about that. But let me hear what I want to understand this nanogram thing, because this is scary as shit. When I first looked up nanogram, I couldn't even find out decent enough information to tell me how much that is. But if you smoked a joint outside and I walked past and, sneezed or coughed or something like this and inhaled your expelling of smoke, that might be enough for me to get pulled over. That might be enough in my blood.
I can't say whether that is fact or not. There have been some studies done into, hotboxing scenarios, and that would be a creative defense if someone did say that was the case. But you're right. They are two different substances. You don't have that, correlation coefficient where, if you're drinking this much alcohol, you will for sure have this much increased risk of having a traffic accident, let's say. Cannabis, it's a bit different. There's been some impairment found at 2 nanograms. There's been studies that say there is no impairment at that level. There's other studies that sort of find that there was no or a very small amount of increased risk of an accident with cannabis. So it's very mixed. The science is very mixed, whereas the science for alcohol is clear. So that much I'll say. And I'll just mention to your point about 0.08 versus 0.2. There's no way to reliably detect THC consumption. So
So they just say, okay, we don't know what we're doing. We'll just make it like weed. We'll make it like booze.
Well, if you can see any silver lining in it, it's that the government has released regulations pursuant to this legislation with regards to blood limits of other drugs. So if you're tested, blood tested, and they're not just going to test for the THC, I presume they're probably going to test for all other drugs.
Sure.
If you have any psilocybin or LSD or this sort of heroin metabolite, you will be convicted of the crime. So
what if I have Ativan in me?
Ativan. I don't think that's not one of the drugs that are being tested.
Of course not. No, I could be half asleep on a friggin' prescription drug, and it's not going to be a problem.
Benzos are not covered, for example, and it's very interesting. They focused on these 7 drugs specifically. I don't know why. Maybe that's because those are the drugs that maybe there's no legal versions of them, so therefore they're only going to focus on the ones that are illegal. But with cannabis, it's at least 2 nanograms and not just 0.
Okay, so then you get to the science. I don't know how much you know about the science. I know more than I used to, and not enough, not as much as I'm going to. But okay, so basically the implication being that cannabis is probably more dangerous and more unhealthy than tobacco. Would you say that's the case, legally speaking? In a legal sense? And I'll tell you why specifically I asked that sense. Because if tobacco is so bad, again, they take the template of booze, they take the template of tobacco, they take the worst elements of that, the most repressive elements of that, and slap it on a substance that doesn't have those markers. And so by doing that, you are creating a completely false paradigm of legal prosecution. You shouldn't be doing that at all. And not you personally, of course, but personally, on a personal level, doesn't it kind of you might have to take your lawyer hat off here. Don't you find that when you wake up to a series of, you love law, okay, great, but if you wake up to a series of convolutions that are going to take so long to unravel, and most of the time there will be infringements on people's rights, and you know, as soon as I arrest you for something, now your mom's upset, now you got to go to the courthouse, now all this series of things that go down because of a series of decisions, which is the legal system, made by people that we can now see are not necessarily based in fact. Okay, so how can you say, oh, you've got that stuff in your system, it's not very good, it's bad, so we're going to come up with this new thing, this new series of rules where if you're going to take it, okay, but do it at home, and you don't get to go anywhere else and do it, and that's that. Well, they're not saying that about cigarettes, are they?
Yeah, well, part of this is that there's two levels of government, the province and the feds, that are both making regulations, and sometimes they overlap.
I don't know why. Kathleen Wynne, the Premier of Ontario, and her team have been working on this for a year, getting it right. And as soon as she announces it the next day, the cops go, no, we won't be ready. So you didn't work on it for a year. Or you did a shitty job working on it for a year.
Yeah, well, I can tell you that when you have these two different levels of government on top of each other, they're putting
or three.
Or three, because the city's going to come and they might regulate, let's say, home cultivation. So there could be a third layer of government, and it is remarkable that the federal government has continued this criminalized approach, when they even said that, and even in the preamble of this bill, it says that one of the objectives is to reduce reliance on the criminal justice system. Well, right now we have about 7 offenses you can be charged with under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act for marijuana.
Yeah.
Under the new legislation, there's going to be about 45 offenses.
Yeah, let's get to that. We got a table here you've compiled.
That's a great table. That's a table by Ottawa lawyer Trina Fraser.
Trina Fraser. Okay, so I've inadvertently snipped the top off, but this is basically, it says here, this is how it was or is, and this is how it's going to be.
No, these are actually all of the, this is actually the offense.
Yeah.
So these are all 45 or so of the offenses, and
this
is the punishment.
Oh, because it had or so many times, I wasn't sure. So that's going to be up to the discretion of the magistrate.
So it'll be up to the discretion. For some of these offenses, it's very interesting. So we have offenses that have both a 14-year maximum imprisonment, which is huge.
14 years, yeah.
Yeah, and what that does is the judge's hands are tied in a sense, because they can't give a conditional sentence or a discharge, whether absolute or conditional discharge, to an individual if they're prosecuted via an indictable offense that has a 14-year maximum. So it's very strange. It's many of these offenses, half of them it seems, have this 14-year imprisonment maximum. They've gotten rid of.
That's 2 legal lifetimes, isn't it?
Yeah, they've got rid of the mandatory minimum. So you can't face a mandatory minimum under the new law when it does get passed. But you can face 14 years max imprisonment, and if the judge does not have the discretion to issue a discharge or conditional sentence, it's sort of like this quid pro quo. The Liberals are saying, we'll get rid of mandatory minimums, but we'll also make it tough on the consumer too.
So to get my way through this, a mandatory minimum then is a thing where if you break some law, at least 6 months or at least a year or whatever it is, right? But now they don't have that. And maybe the same law where you might have got 6 months, a year, 18 months before, and now I'm the judge, and now there's no mandatory minimum, and I don't like you, and now you're going to get 3 years, or 10 years, or 14 years.
Well, that could be the case, but judges lawyers submit case law to say, look, this is a proper range, and maybe the judge will side on one side or the other, somewhere in the middle. But judges don't like being overturned, so usually they'll sort of stick with what is good practice in the courts. But anything's possible. I mean, I remember reading a case where an individual had 6 what the judge called super marijuana plants, and this guy went to jail for a number of months. And now that's almost going to be fully legal. They've just removed, going forward, the 100-centimeter limit in report
for the height of a plant.
Parliament for the height of a plant, and so we'll see what happens in that respect. But it's certainly very interesting. There's some areas that are not criminalized, and there's some areas that are criminalize the law. Like, for example, you're going to be able to have unlimited amount of marijuana at home.
Unlimited at home.
At home. So you can have like a wine cellar of marijuana if you want. But the moment you go outside to the public, you can only have 30 grams of dried marijuana or the equivalent. So it's very interesting. In some respects, it's a permissive law, and you can, as long as you don't use an organic solvent, you can.
What does that mean? An organic solvent? That sounds like a good solvent. It sounds like water. What is that?
Well, that's something like butane.
Okay.
I'm not a scientist. I'm trying to figure out if that includes alcohol. I think it does include alcohol, but I'm not sure. It does
include alcohol? Because 99% alcohol is what I used.
Yeah, well, I'm not a scientist, and I've been trying to get to the bottom of that. I haven't been aware of. I have not been aware of any prosecutions for using alcohol.
I'm going to be scared.
Could be argued, though.
I'm going to be scared if I'm the first judge to put you away for 14 years. I don't want to be that judge. I don't want to be that lawyer. He's going to get overturned. Fuck these idiots. You can't put a guy in jail for 14 years. Let's for that. And like I say, 2 legal lifetime. You're in the 7-year cycle of life, and you regenerate yourself. So you're supposed to do 2. So give me a couple of these laws that have a version or something similar today that's going to go away and be replaced by this that has a particularly heinous penalty. Give me an example of what you think are particularly deep, dark danks of stench on this.
So possession is actually going to be removed as an offense, but you can be charged with possession of illicit cannabis. So if you know that your cannabis was grown by someone who grew more than 4 plants, or they weren't supposed to grow it, or if it's illicit cannabis by the definition of the law, that's going to be a new offense. So that sort of replaces the possession offense. Right. So possession in public over 30 grams, that's an offense. Possession of illicit cannabis, that's an offense. So you had individuals like Jody Emery go up to the committee. I believe it was Jody Emery, or it could have been Dana Larson, who said this joint, this law doesn't even legalize the joint I have in my pocket, and that's because it's ostensibly from a dispensary, one of the ones that are not legal at this time. So it's weird. You'll if you know that it's illicit cannabis, if you go to a dispensary and you know it's not one of the legal dispensaries, you could be charged and go to jail for up to 5 years, or you could get a ticket. That's really up to the discretion of the cops.
Okay, great. So if I do go to the liquor store to buy liquor, am I okay to buy like 3 cases of beer, 4 magnums of champagne, a thing of scotch, a thing of vodka, and I mean, like, a fifth, a pounder, a big 750.
I do not know of any law that prevents you from doing so.
And a case of beer and some wine and some shooters and stuff like this, and I've got a shopping cart and I'm pushing it down the street. Is that okay?
I don't know of any law against that.
So once again, then we have this thing where we're going to treat it like booze, we're going to treat it like this. Oh, except for when it's okay to carry booze around. More than 30 ounces of booze is okay, right? More than 30 grams of booze is okay, right? Whatever that works out to. And then you get back to,
much sense.
No, and then you get back to the fact that an ounce, which is the old metric system, has replaced that in Canada, but in other places in the States, I guess they still use ounces. But an ounce works out to 28.5 grams or something. And some arbitrary pencil pusher decided, you know what? Let's give them 30. Let's just round it up to 30 because I think 28.5 is going to be a screwed up. Let's be benevolent enough to say you can have 1 ounce of a thing that apparently you can grow tons of in your house, and guys are walking around with booze in a cart while they're smoking cigarettes, which is supposed to be as much or more so dangerous than cannabis, but you can smoke cigarettes anywhere you want, like 9 meters away from a doorway, fine, outside, no problem. That's the only place left. Do that with a joint, you're in trouble, because joints are different than booze, and booze is different than cigarettes. But again, we're taking all the worst repressive aspects of these 2 other controlled substances and slapping it on something while we skip over the facts of how this stuff is. And listen, this whole thing, folks, if you're listening to us now on Green Crush, you're probably wondering how you came across that information. Maybe your friend is dying from cancer and wants to research what I did to get out of that particular pickle. That's what we do on this show. It's at Green Crush Pod. If you can find us, we're speaking now with Harrison Jordan, who will soon, probably the next time he's on the show, he'll be a lawyer. Maybe before that, but slightly. You just admitted how stupid it is.
I do have serious issues with the Cannabis Act as it's being proposed.
How are you going to hold your emotions in check when you're in court speaking with some obtuse judge that doesn't want to be overturned on a silly law that you know in your deeper inner brain, this is totally fucked. I can't believe this guy's going along with this. I can't believe this dude of mine's in trouble. I can't believe I got to say these things. I can't believe these stupid laws. I can't believe I'm trying to help this guy out who got busted for 32 grams of pot instead of 30. How do you contain that shit when you're in the court situation?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of head-scratching court cases that I've either been involved or observed, where I mean, there was one where it was actually reported on in the Globe and Mail. He was a single father who grew, I think it was 29 plants, and the Crown was seeking the mandatory minimum, because the mandatory minimum, you can sometimes, they don't actually have to seek it, so it's mandatory if the Crown wants it to be, right? So
yeah,
so
this is an arbitrary nature of things.
Fortunately, they're getting rid of that, but obviously I have my own reservations with the legislation. But in that point, he actually he had shown that he hadn't consumed cannabis after that. He had stayed away from cannabis. He had a daughter, and the Children's Aid Society said, you know, we'll support whatever happens, and this is a letter in support of him. And all of these things that really were in his favor, but the Crown still went ahead with pursuing a mandatory minimum. It wasn't until we had myself and Alan Young, I was working for Alan Young at the time, it was only when we had come up with the constitutional challenge and said we're going to challenge this, did they actually pull it. So now they still wanted him in for 6 months, but they weren't gonna go for the mandatory minimum. They can sort of insulate themselves from a challenge if they so fit. Is it abusive process? I don't know. Some people might say that. I wouldn't go that far, but it's something that's concerning that they can, once they know that they're being challenged on a law, they can just drop the case, or in this case, not pursue the mandatory minimum.
And these are all the decisions and actions coming from the very clean and clear, unfettered, undamaged minds of these legislators, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you're sitting here telling me that these things are so crazy and so out of whack and head-scratching, and you don't know how to figure it out, and you can't it's a friggin' mess. You could just label it as a friggin' mess. And it's a friggin' mess, and it's all purportedly coming from clear-thinking, sensible people who don't partake in cannabis and think it's a bad idea. And they offer this barf soup of nonsense. Mm-hmm. And then they're going to sit here and tell us how crazy we are for using cannabis.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm really concerned about is the fact that some of the offenses have the ability, the government has the ability, the law enforcement has the ability to give out tickets. And those tickets, if you're convicted, would not go on your criminal record. But that's really up to the discretion of a police officer on the street. And
sure,
we know that it's going to disproportionately affect people of color.
Yeah,
and that's what's going to happen, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also a 1978 Steve Martin joke. So we haven't really made a lot of progress in some areas that, oh, no, I wouldn't smoke marijuana. You can get a ticket for that. And everyone laughs because it was 40 years ago. All right. On the silly note, and these 5 things, and I'm sure there are more now. You wrote this in June. So here's one. Number 2, this is not going to be okay. Public display of cannabis accessories, such as bongs and pipes. You know, the means to consume it, in the windowsills of shops.
Mm-hmm.
Why not?
Well, the new law, the old law, I'll step back and say the old law actually does technically criminalize the sale of bongs, but it's not enforced. The new law doesn't criminalize the sale of bongs and pipes per se, but it does criminalize the promotion of it and the public display of it. So there's a lot of
the promotion of
cannabis accessories, and also the promotion of cannabis-based, cannabis-related services. So in the article, I touch upon the accessories, but it's also going to touch upon anyone that has a service that's related to cannabis. So it's a really far-reaching law. They're not saying you can't put it in front of someone's face, but they are restricting what you can do.
The actual cannabis.
They're restricting the actual cannabis and the cannabis accessories where those can be shown, so they can't be shown where a young person might be.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. I am trying to make it clear to people. This is the mission statement of the show. I'm trying to make it clear to people that despite the fact that they might think it seems like a series of crazy conspiracies, that I actually did come down with stage 4 cancer, and I actually am not suffering from that right now because I used cannabis. And I am telling people, because it was a hell ride for a lot of it, medically speaking particularly, I am trying to tell people how to cut through a lot of that brush. I want to be a trailblazer because I went through that. That was a shitty ride, and I know that I learned a lot of things. I wrote a lot of things down. And if I had to do it all over again, which I don't want to do, it would be much easier for me this time. And I am trying to bring that to the listeners. I'm trying to bring that way. It's the fourth door, I call it, to the fifth stage. There's no such thing as stage 5 cancer. Exactly. So, am I promoting cannabis illegally while I sit here in this window?
Well, there are. I have to take a look at the legislation to see if you fit in one of the exceptions. I know one of the exceptions is if it's a theatrical production, then the laws don't apply. But or that's an exemption to the promotion law.
Was that what Alex Jones did in the States? Pretty much, he said, "No, I'm a performance artist. I don't really believe these things."
Oh, I'm not sure.
Didn't hear about that? Okay.
No, I wouldn't put it past him to say that, though.
So, yeah, false promotion is prohibited in the new law. So promotion, was the definition of that is the promotion of cannabis use?
No, that would be promoting the product.
Okay.
So now false promotion will be illegal.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter who you're getting it from. If they say it's one strain, but really it's the other. I mean, you'll be getting it from a store. That's where you have to get it from, or grow it yourself. But if you get it from a store, they can't falsely promote.
Okay.
it.
So now that I have this legally obtained non-illicit or licit cannabis, but, you know, an officer sees me standing at a streetcar stop or bus stop or whatever it is, and let's go talk to that guy with the long hair.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a real thing? And he says, let me see, where'd you get this cannabis? Where'd you get it? Where's it from? And then it boils down this series of questions that I have obtained illegal cannabis. There I am smoking a joint. How is he gonna tell the difference between something that's I'm not supposed to have, an illicit substance, and something that I am supposed to have, which maybe came from an LP or whatever they want me to do?
Yeah, I mean, that's very...
Like, you can tell if a guy's drunk, but you can't tell exactly what kind of booze the guy drank.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Well, the fact that you will be allowed to grow up to 4 plants really throws a wrench into this notion of illicit cannabis and how law enforcement is going to be able to distinguish illicit cannabis from licit.
Mm-hmm.
My first thoughts on this, when I first saw it, was that, wow, there's going to be a presumption that if you're carrying cannabis that's not in a sales container, that's not an official sales container, and it's just in some Ziploc bag, there might be a presumption that that's illicit cannabis. But now that you're able to grow up to 4 plants, it's going to be much harder to say that cannabis was illicit. I think that they'll probably reserve that offense for when there's large quantities, when someone's doing large scale distribution. It's very, I mean, it's very disconcerting that even if you have under 30 grams of illicit cannabis, that'll be a crime. You can go to jail for 5 years, or you can
14.
get a ticket.
Or 14 or 5.
5 for possessing just illicit cannabis, but if you're doing stuff like distribution or anything or other offenses involving plants, those are closer to 14 or 7. Yeah.
Okay. There's a guy stealing an office chair there. Let me ask you this. In that, I believe there is a series of premises upon which these newer laws and acknowledgments of use of cannabis are built. There's a certain understanding. That's what the HESA hearings were all about. Those politicians, we're trying to learn about what this thing is so we can make up a bunch of laws about it. How can you make up a series of laws like this with 14-year penalties, et cetera, when you don't have you're not seeming to use the most accessible and easy to find scientific data on what a healthful property it is. I don't know how you can pretend that this stuff doesn't work when there have been articles as far back as, at least in the modern times, into the 90s. The big one on November 4th, 2001, from The Guardian in England, about how we're beyond the hearsay zone. We're beyond the, what do they call it when people say, well, it's anecdotal. Isn't there something about anecdotes coming up over and over again where it's now upon you to have to investigate these things? As a possibility, because then you're going to wind up going, hey, this is good for this, it's good for that. Let's make a bunch of laws against it.
Yeah, unfortunately, the bureaucrats and the politicians still see it as a harmful substance. They're still criminalizing it as if it's a public harm. But if they really thought it was a public harm, they should treat it with other initiatives other than the criminal justice system. It's kind of remarkable because, again, as I said, there's 45 new offenses, and these are offenses that the federal government could have at least said to the provinces, why don't you formulate your own offenses, because those offenses won't go on your sort of federal criminal record.
Okay, we're going to put a pause in here for a second.
Sure.
We're going to go to a bit of a break. I have to go to the bathroom, and we'll be right back. And it's a live show, so you're actually going to hear this. We got another segment with Harrison Jordan. We'll be right back. So sorry.
Doing well.
Okay. Good, the music's still on. Hey, folks, sorry about that. It's a podcast. Skip ahead to whatever this is in the show. All right. Got a bit of a sweat coming on. It didn't feel so great, so I went to spit up a little bit. There we go. Live show. All right, so a couple more questions on the 5 points here. Vending machines. British Columbia. Anywhere else in the country?
I'm not sure where else there are marijuana vending machines, but they will soon be illegal.
So we're sitting on a future market of antique machines.
Yeah, those machines will have to be repurposed. But then again, those dispensaries were contravening federal law in the first place. So I'm not sure if law enforcement will grab onto this law. It's really hard to tell how much law enforcement and Crown prosecution will really cling on to these laws and go after them, go after people for them.
Isn't the government itself, the government of Canada, since 2000, guilty of breaking the law regarding the Allard case?
In what sense?
In the sense that we keep fighting the same point over and over again, and it keeps getting cited as something. It was recently used in a case for a wrong reason. And I guess I'll need you to quickly tell everyone what the Allard case is. But basically saying that if the government can't seem to forward some kind of serviceable framework for distribution and consumption, that you can just go ahead and do it.
Right. Well, I will say that there's different constitutional aspects between adult use and medical use. There's been a litany of case law to suggest that medical use is protected and that there can be violations of individuals' security of the person if they are not able to use cannabis. Could you repeat the question? I got lost in my own thoughts there.
Yeah, that's okay. Basically, I was just trying to understand why it is that that folks are. The overarching question is that when there is so much science showing that the stuff is actually helpful, how can the government break its own series of rules regarding the Allard ruling?
Yeah, so the Allard case arose when there were some individuals who took a look at the fact that homegrown would not be permitted, and they said this is going to seriously jeopardize my health. They tried to advance an argument about cost. Eventually, the courts, this was a federal court decision, found that those individuals should still be allowed to grow their cannabis like they were allowed to do under the old system. And so there was a period of time where you could not sign up to be to cultivate your own cannabis, but now you can. They brought back the system ostensibly because of the Allard decision. So the government would argue that they're following the Allard decision because now you can sign up if you have a medical document to grow for yourself.
Yeah.
That's medical, though. So the Allard decision can't really translate too well to the adult use side. And even the use of Allard's a great case. It was a great victory. But some have said that too much stock is being put into it, because they're with respect to a specific line in the decision that said dispensaries are at the heart of access, because there was some evidence presented in the trial that dispensaries provided reasonable access and provided an alternative to the cultivation and to the system that was already in place. So that's been a line that has been utilized in challenges since then. But we're starting to see that some courts and some commentators are saying, hold on, wait a second, Allard's not the end-all, be-all. But it was an important case, and we do have to give our thanks to John Conroy, the lawyer in that case, for arguing that, because he did a great job.
Okay, quick questions. We're running out of time. I'm really glad you came in. The 4-plant situation. Mm-hmm. What is it right now? Before the laws change, how many plants are you allowed to have?
So right now, before the laws change, you're not allowed to have any plants.
And later you're going to have 4, and you're saying that's a good thing?
I'm saying it's a good thing that people will be allowed to grow for. I think it's a good thing.
Do you know what the commensurate tables are between what your prescription is and ergo how many plants you need?
So there is a calculator that you can use that determines if you're growing indoor or outdoor, what the government says is the maximum amount of plants you can grow for medical.
Okay,
so it really
is it
depends.
online?
Is it online? Yes, you can Google ACMPR calculator. That'll probably come up just right when you have that. So if you're looking to
ACMPR calculator,
if you use a certain amount of cannabis per day, and you're going to be cultivating, and you sort of know what your yield is like, certainly check up the calculator to see if it matches up with Health Canada, because there's a lot of discrepancy.
Right, a lot of discrepancy.
Yeah, so what you grow might not be what
This
Health
is an
Canada says is what the yield should be, right?
There is
It
much
could be
to
above
be
or below, but these are the rules that they've set for medical. That won't affect medical. What's very interesting now is that there's a possession limit if you're medical that applies no matter if you're public or private. But now, for the adult use, non-medical, you'll be allowed to possess as much as you want at home. So how come the recreational? So I think that's going to be amended so that I'm not sure, but I think that possession limit you have as a medical patient that's tied to your grams per day, that might only apply in public, because if rec users at home can amass a wine cellar, then certainly if you're medically entitled to it, you should be able to have as much as reasonably required.
I read something, and I have to check this up. I don't usually bring this kind of thing to the show, but I read something from 1995 There was a Canadian man in 1995 who had a prescription of some nature, medical. This is, in the 90s, before even the Allard ruling. And he was given a medical prescription for a certain amount of cannabis daily. And I think it was 10 grams a day or something. 10 grams a day. And if you do the work on that, 10 grams a day available to you, you need a lot more than 4 plants.
Yeah, no. So if you use it medically and you're using a substantial amount, you're not going to be able to rely on that exemption that is in place for recreational cannabis consumers.
So basically, I can grow as much as I can yield out of my 4 plants. I can use that for my cancer. That's no problem.
Well, yes, with the new removal of the 100 centimeter. That was done at the committee, so hopefully that sticks, because that's arbitrary. If you go away for vacation, as someone had suggested, you could become a criminal without even this is the thing you were saying before, and I say this about using it as a medical substance for yourself to pull yourself out of the problems like I was in and some other people have to experience, to use it in that way, and then to be told this is how much you need. And this is how much you're going to use to get out of that medical situation. And you're allowed to own far less than this. Mm. So now I have to go to an LP, right? At that point. I have to go to a licensed producer to come up with enough. And now we're in a situation where I keep hearing about how there isn't going to be enough licensed producer cannabis available across the country come the deadline of July, whatever it is. Yeah, I think there's going to be problems with supply. There's also probably going to be problems with variety, because if the Wynne government wants to sell it for $10 a gram, all taxes, and that's doable, but the costs really add up. And so if you're a large-scale producer, you might have a lower cost per gram as your production cost, so you'll afford being able to sell it to the government for $3 or $4. Not all licensed producers will be able to afford that, just because there's going to be a lot of smaller licensed producers. So it'll be very interesting to see how it turns out. But if they're only offering cannabis from 2 or 3 very large companies that sort of what their focus is on lowering their cost or one of their focuses is lowering their cost per gram. It's almost in a sense going to be a race to the bottom. The consumers might not appreciate the quality of the cannabis, and I'm not talking about good manufacturing practices, because it has to be that. But I'm talking about when you look at it, there's a cannabis consumer would look at a bud and just know that. That looks nice. There's something about it. It just glistens. Mm-hmm. And that you might not see that with cannabis if there's not a lot of variety.
Yeah. Well, I'm not even so worried about the variety just yet. I'm worried about the fact that what seems to be going on is a bunch of folks who don't know how to build things are telling the builders to get their illegal businesses all packed up and get the hell out of here. We're going to build things now. Mm. And we hope we're doing a good job. We're not going to use blueprints. We're not going to use architects' drawings. We're not going to use physics. We're just going to slap a bunch of shit together, see how it does. If you get hurt by that, if it damages your lifestyle, whatever, we'll get to that. We'll figure it out later. We'll sort of chunk it along as it goes. We'll nurse this thing. Can you imagine that kind of mindset going into some of these buildings here or your house or whatever? What is okay with these people who decide, let's take a bunch of hodgepodge stuff, slap it together, we'll take a little bit of something from Colorado, a little bit of something from my puritanical background, a little bit of something from, and cobble together this disaster and then sit there and watch it, and then you'll upset the apple cart, so you'll get busted, and then there'll be a problem. Okay, and then they'll amend it a little bit. Like, why not just sit down and go, this is all great, because there's tons of examples in the real world that stink and aren't working and suck and are clearly retro, and there's other stuff, some other cool things that people are coming up with, like in Colorado and other places that do seem to work, and they do, like where they do want them to use the dispensary model, which, by the way, the UBC has decided is the most efficient and also the most preferred. So you're eschewing democracy as well with
Yeah,
that,
I mean,
because
there's-
most people want to use
There's
that
been some
system.
great research out of UBC indicating that patients prefer dispensaries. Not all patients, and certainly not all the time, but there are certain aspects of the dispensary experience
that should be there.
and that are really helping patients right now.
Yeah. Well, you've helped me because I've learned a lot more things, and I'm going to ask you back right away.
Okay.
Hopefully you'll come back sometime. We'll figure out when. And I know this is going to be fascinating for you, your career personally, because, you are moving from, like, your articling is going to take about the amount of time until they make this announcement.
Yeah,
Something like it's very close.
It'll be around the same point, so it's around the same time, so it's going to be a very exciting time. I love waking up every morning and seeing what is new in the industry, because everything is changing every single day, and it's an exciting time.
Yeah, it is an exciting time. One more question
Sure.
for you. My last two guests were not, they're very helpful. Very fantastic people who do great work, but they don't use this stuff, and they promote it, knowing scientifically, knowing compassion, knowing all of that. They do it anyway from their positions. We had Agromed, the CEO of Agromed, this American business out of Pennsylvania, very knowledgeable man, and also Paul Flynn from Britain, and they don't use it. So do you use it?
Well,
Or are you not allowed to say that?
I would just say
does it
that
go?
it's very interesting, because there is a marijuana researcher in the U.S. that says, I will not give anyone an answer, because if you say yes, it seems like you're too personally invested in it as a researcher, I guess. If you say no, it'll seem like you're not in touch with the subject matter that you're with. But
Yeah, that's bizarre.
so you know what? I'm going to take the same approach.
take
as
the same
that-
approach.
The same approach as that researcher. Yeah.
Okay, so this is how I would ask this question that I just asked you in a legalese kind of way. My version of legalese. Okay. Have you, at any given time, either before or after the incident in question at the time with other people, decided that it was possible to maybe or maybe not use cannabis at such time wherein you may or may not have made the decision to do so? What the hell did I just say? What a lawyer would say. That's what I just said.
Yeah, that does sound very lawyerly, and also that might be a question you get at the border when you're going to the U.S.
Right.
And if you do smoke marijuana and you say you have smoked marijuana, that could be grounds to refuse you, because you've just admitted to
Could it also
a
be
controlled
grounds to-
substance offense.
Does it hang on the discretion of the guard? Could he say, you did smoke marijuana, but do you do it anymore? And you say no. You go, okay. Like, do they have that still, or as soon as I say yes, I do, they're going to shut the door?
They certainly have discretion, and you usually don't hear about the cases where people get through, because they're not going to publicize.
Right.
They're not going to say I smoked weed and I told this border guard.
Yeah.
So ostensibly there might be some cases where if you mention cannabis, it might not prompt those further questions. But
Well, I don't understand how people tour, because I probably won't be able to go to the States. I won't lie to them. I'll say yes. So if they don't Google my name or ask me something, and I go. And if they do, then I won't
You
get
just
to
heard
go in.
about Melissa Etheridge. She was
Melissa
arrested for
Etheridge,
going over the border.
Yeah, and the musician Todd Rundgren. They just left Canada recently, and they were using cannabis, but they're American citizens, so they're going to let them in. They're just going to be arrested.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we're moving along with the progress of this. So anyway, we are Green Crush. I'd like to thank Harrison Jordan for coming on. He will soon be a lawyer at the apex of Canada's turnaround from the crazy, nutty, repressive, unscientific laws regarding cannabis we have now to the crazy, repressive, unscientific laws we're going to have come next year. Harrison Jordan, thanks for coming on the show. This is Green Crush. And just before we go, folks, there's one particular thing I want to tease you with, because next week we're going to spend some time on the opioid crisis and try to get to the bottom of that. Here it is from the New York Times, May 11th, 2017. It's kind of really over now, the question of what to do about the opioid crisis. Here's what you do. You arrest all of the CEOs in the companies that are providing the opioids. Isn't that simple? Here it is from the New York Times. Narcotic maker guilty of deceit over marketing. From Virginia, back in May 10th, the company that makes the painkiller OxyContin, hillbilly heroin, the same thing Rush Limbaugh went down for, this terrible opioid that's killing people and fattening wallets everywhere. And 3 of its current and former executives pleaded guilty in federal court to criminal charges that they had misled doctors and patients when it claimed the drug was less likely to be abused than traditional narcotics. 2001, there's this doctor there from a particular pharmaceutical company in front of Congress telling everyone there, who even bothered to ask questions back in 2001. I don't think they do that now. And they're asking him all about, well, is this going to be a problem for people? And he's absolutely assuring them it's not going to be any kind of problem at all. And these guys will continue to roll and make tons of money. So just understand that there is a controlled opposition going on right now. You're not supposed to know about the old facts or the new facts. Scientifically speaking of cannabis, they gloss over them when they create repressive laws to put us away. And they let people manufacture things and profit greatly from the deaths of probably hundreds of thousands of people by now, if not more, for propagating a poison while they tell us how terrible this 5,000-year-old medicine is. Anyway, folks, that's what I would call an inconsistency beyond...
This is an inconsistency.
Yeah.
There is much to be considered.
And we'll do that next week on Green Crush. Thanks for joining us. It's been a lot of fun. It was quite nice having you in the studio. Sorry I had to run away there for a bit, but that is the way it goes sometime on a live show. Green Crush. We'll be back next Tuesday at 2:03. And we're always a little bit late.
Mary Jane Baker. No, I'm Mary Jane Baker. Wait, can we do that again?
Mary Jane Baker, take 27.
Hey, I'm Mary Jane Baker, and you're listening to 420radio.ca.
This is how
Cannabis Broadcasting Group here at cbgtv.com.